Beneath the temple's beauty, something ancient still breathes. The reflection pool. The reflection swimming pools of Angkor, what have been designed to reflect the temple flawlessly, growing the phantasm that the massive shape existed simultaneously in two worlds, the earthly realm and the divine. Dr. Samantha Reed had come to look at those swimming pools, specifically their engineering and symbolic significance. What she did not anticipate turned into to discover that the historic Khmer developers had understood something about reflections that cutting-edge science had forgotten. She arrived in Siem Reap at some point of the rainy season, when the swimming pools have been complete and the temple's mirrored image was at its most pristine. Her manual, an elderly Cambodian man named Savan, met her on the airport with a caution. "You want to have a look at the pools at night time?" His weathered face creased with issue. "That isn't wise. The locals, we do not go near the temple after darkish, especially now not close to the water." "I want to degree how moonlight influences the mirrored image," Samantha explained. "The Khmer have been sophisticated astronomers. I accept as true with the swimming pools had been designed to seize specific celestial activities." Savan shook his head slowly. "The swimming pools seize more than reflections, miss. They were built as obstacles, now not just decorations. Water that suggests two worlds can also permit matters skip between." Samantha smiled with courtesy. She'd heard comparable superstitions at every site she'd studied. "I'll be cautious." The first 3 nights, she labored with a group, 2 graduate students and a local photographer. They documented the swimming pools, measured depths, analyzed the mineral content of the water. The entirety changed into everyday, expert, unremarkable. Then her graduate students were given food poisoning and needed to return to Phnom Penh. The photographer's equipment turned into stolen. By way of the 4th night, Samantha was on my own except for Savan, who refused to leave in spite of his obvious unease. "If you ought to try this," he stated, "then I ought to watch. Someone has to do not forget what passed off to tell your own family." "That is morbid," Samantha replied, but his truth unsettled her. They entered the temple complex at 8 p.m. after the last travelers had departed. The security guards knew Savan and let them skip with minimal questions. As they walked the causeway towards the principal temple, Samantha noticed how unique the whole thing felt in darkness. The large stone faces that coated the paths seemed to observe her. The Apsara dancers carved into the walls seemed to shift in her peripheral imaginative and prescient. The principal reflection pool stretched earlier than them, a super black reflect. In its floor, Angkor Wat stood inverted, towers pointing downward into liquid depths, galleries and corridors descending into darkness. It changed into lovely and disorienting. Samantha set up her gadget on the pool's side. Cameras on tripods, light meters, water trying out kits. The moon became 3/4 full, offering exquisite illumination. She started taking measurements, documenting how the moonlight played throughout the water, how the temple's reflection shifted with the nighttime's development. At 10:47 p.m., she observed the first discrepancy. In the mirrored image, there were lighting fixtures in the temple windows, flickering orange like torchlight. However, when she seemed up at the actual temple, it became absolutely darkish. She checked her camera's screen. The photograph showed the equal element, lights in the reflection that failed to exist in reality. "Savan, do you spot that?" He'd been sitting on the causeway, pointedly not searching on the water. Now he glanced over and his face went faded. "We ought to go away, now." "However, that is charming. It is able to be some type of optical phenomenon, or—" "It is not optical," Savan interrupted. "It's miles the other temple, the only that exists inside the water, the one the ancient priests built to trap." He stopped himself. "Please, miss, I have seen this earlier then. It ends badly." However, Samantha turned into already transferring towards the pool's area, her scientific interest overwhelming caution. The lighting inside the pondered temple were shifting now, as though humans carried torches through the corridors. She ought to see shadows, figures shifting with purpose. There need to be a person in the real temple, she reasoned. Squatters, or perhaps body of workers doing protection. She turned to examine the real Angkor Wat darkish, completely darkish. No lighting fixtures, no motion. The reflection showed something different. Samantha pulled out her telephone to name protection, but the sign became long gone. She tried her radio. Static. All her gadget changed into operating, however verbal exchange with the outside world had been reduced off. "It is starting," Savin whispered. "The reflection is becoming more potent than fact. This occurs from time to time at some point of certain moon levels while someone looks too long into the water. The barrier weakens." "What barrier?" "Among the world this is and the world that became. Angkor Wat become built as a temple to Vishnu, yes, but it turned into also built over something older. A place of power wherein the veil between realms was skinny. The pools have been intended to reveal the distinction. That is truth. This is mirrored image. Never shall they meet. But this night," he gestured on the water, "tonight they are assembly." As if to affirm his words, the water started out to ripple in spite of the still air. The temple's mirrored image wavered, then steadied into a clearer image, clearer than the real temple above. Samantha should see info within the mirrored image that shouldn't be visible. Man or woman stones, carved inscriptions, and people moving figures with their torches. One of the figures approached the edge of the reflected pool. It seemed up, directly at Samantha. The face became incorrect. Human in form but elongated, the eyes too large, the mouth too extensive. It smiled, revealing tooth that went lower back to a ways. Then it reached up, breaking the floor of the reflection from below. A hand emerged from the water, gray, dripping, impossibly long-fingered. It grasped the stone fringe of the pool. Samantha stumbled backward, her thoughts refusing to process what she was seeing. Some other hand emerged. Then ahead, water streaming from stretched functions. The element pulled itself out of the mirrored image pool, mountaineering from water into air, from the pondered world into reality. "Run!" Savin grabbed her arm. They ran back along the causeway. However, whilst Samantha glanced over her shoulder, she saw more figures rising from the pool. Dozens of them, pulling themselves out of the reflection, leaving wet footprints on stone that had been dry moments before. "What are they?" she gasped. "The forgotten," Savin panted. "Spirits trapped in the mirrored image while the temple changed into consecrated. The clergymen executed rituals to seal them there, to apply the pools as prisons. But the barrier weakens through the years. And while a person stares too lengthy, too deeply into the water, it creates a bridge." They reached the outer gallery and ducked interior. Savin led her via corridors she'd studied at some stage in the day, but which regarded completely special in darkness. The bas-reliefs were not just carvings anymore. They seemed to move, to respire, scenes of ancient battles and cosmic dances gambling out on stone partitions. "In which are we going?" Samantha requested. "The relevant sanctuary. It is the most powerful factor, the most sacred. If we can reach it, we might be able to wait till sunrise. They are creatures of mirrored image. They cannot exist in direct daylight." They climbed stairs, ascending toward the temple's heart. At the back of them, Samantha heard wet footsteps, voices talking in historical Khmer, laughter that echoed wrong within the stone passages. They burst into the central sanctuary just as something grabbed Samantha's ankle. She kicked free, and Savin slammed the heavy wood door, bracing it together with his frame. Something thudded in opposition to it from the other aspect, time and again. "This won't hold," he stated. "We want to perform the sealing ritual." "I don't know any rituals." "I do. My grandmother taught me. However, I'll need time, and I will need you to trust me." He commenced pulling gadgets from his worn bag, incense, small candles, a bronze bowl. "Stand inside the middle. Do not depart the circle I am about to draw, irrespective of what you spot." Samantha did as instructed. Savin worked fast, drawing symbols at the floor with white powder, arranging candles in unique styles. He started to chant, phrases in Sanskrit mixed with Khmer, his voice rising and falling in rhythms that seemed to resonate with the stone itself. The pounding on the door stopped. The silence turned into some way worse. Savin persisted chanting. The candles flickered notwithstanding the still air. And then Samantha saw them, no longer at the door, however rising from the shadows within the corners of the sanctuary. The forgotten have been seeping through the partitions like water, their meditated forms locating cracks and gaps in truth. Savan, don't wreck the circle, he commanded, his chanting intensifying. The forgotten turned around them, staying simply outside the boundary Savan had drawn. They were more seen now, and Samantha should see them surely. They were human once, people who'd lived when Angkor Wat became new, when the empire became at its peak. Monks, nobles, servants, but centuries trapped in reflection had changed them, stretched them, made them into something else. Considered one of them spoke, its voice like wind over water. So long. Goodbye we have waited. Trapped among being and now not being, watching the sector through liquid glass, unable to touch, to sense, to live. And now, in the end, the barrier cracks. You have been sealed for a motive, Savan spoke back, never stopping his ritual. You consumed the reciting. You pulled human beings into the reflections and took their places in the global. It truly is why you were trapped. We had been hungry, some other forgotten hissed. Reflection is cold. Reflection is empty. We desired warm temperature, sensation, lifestyles. Extra of them emerged from the partitions, from the shadows, from the spaces between stones. The sanctuary was filling with forgotten ones, all urgent in opposition to the invisible barrier of Savan's ritual circle. Samantha noticed something terrible. The white powder line Savan had drawn became beginning to dissolve, as if moisture was seeping up from the stone. The forgotten observed too. They leaned nearer, their stretched faces eager. Savan, the circle. I understand. The rain has saturated the stone. The moisture is breaking the barrier. His voice becomes strained. I cannot maintain them tons longer. Then what can we do? He met her eyes, and in them she saw resignation. We deliver them what they need, a existence for a lifestyles, a mirrored image for truth. It truly is how the unique sealing worked. Monks volunteered to take the forgotten's place in the mirrored image, to end up everlasting guardians, preserving the barrier robust from the other facet. You're not suggesting. One people has to go into the reflection, willingly, to reinforce the seal. He persisted chanting, but his palms have been shaking. It ought to be me. I am antique. I have lived my existence. No, Samantha said, her mind racing. There has to be some other way. We are within the 21st century. We've got science generation. Your technology would not account for this, Savan stated gently. A few things are older than technological know-how. A few prisons require living guardians, cognizance binding consciousness. The circle broke. The white powder dissolved into wet smears. The forgotten surged forward. Samantha made her selection. She was younger, stronger. She'd created this example with her cussed interest. And maybe, simply maybe, she could find a way out from the opposite aspect. She stepped toward the forgotten. I'll cross, tell me how. No, Savan reached for her, however it turned into two paths due. The forgotten surrounded her, their bloodless hands grasping, pulling. Samantha felt herself being tugged downward, though she wasn't falling. She changed into being drawn into reflection, into the space among fact and image. The closing factor she saw turned into Savan's anguished face, his mouth forming phrases she could not hear. Then water closed over her, cold and dark, and she became drowning in mirrored image. While Samantha opened her eyes, she turned into standing in the central sanctuary. But it was extraordinary. The colors have been incorrect, the entirety barely too brilliant, edges too sharp, shadows too deep. And he or she should experience it, the wrongness, the reversed nature of this region. She changed into, within the pondered temple, the prison of the forgotten. Outside the sanctuary, she may want to see the arena through the mirrored image pool, distorted, inverted, however seen. She watched Savan stumbling out of the temple, watched the solar upward push over Angkor Wat Dawn mild hit the pools, and the forgotten retreated, flowing lower back into the meditated temple, returned into their jail. They exceeded through Samantha like bloodless water, and he or she understood. She turned into the new mum or dad, the anchor that held them here. Days surpassed in abnormal rhythms. Time moved otherwise within the reflection. Samantha watched travelers come and move, noticed them taking pics of the swimming pools, never knowing what lurked in the mirrored image underneath their personal pics. She attempted to attain through, to interrupt the surface, but she couldn't. She turned into bound here, part of the barrier now. From time to time, she saw Savan. He got here each day, stood by using the pool, spoke to her although she could not listen him through the water. He left services, plant life, incense, food, keeping the antique approaches, keeping the ritual strong. And Samantha watched. She watched the seasons change, watched vacationers grow to be a flood whilst the pandemic ended, watched Savan grow older and frailer. She watched the opposite guardians, centuries worth of monks and volunteers who'd given themselves to keep the seal. They didn't communicate, did not have interaction. They were consciousness without voice, awareness without organization, everlasting sentries watching an eternal jail. The forgotten were constantly there, prowling the rims of the pondered temple, testing the bounds. They whispered to her, "You are one folks now, trapped, bloodless, empty, give up, forestall resisting, allow us to via." However, Samantha held firm. She idea of Savan's sacrifice, of all of the guardians who'd come before. She notion of the world above, mistaken, complex, painful but alive. And she understood why the seal needed to hold. Years passed, or perhaps it becomes centuries. Time felt meaningless inside the mirrored image. Savan stopped coming. New humans seemed via the pool on occasion, researchers like she'd been, curious about the mysteries of Angkor Wat. Samantha tried to warn them, to make herself visible, but she became just a part of the mirrored image now, any other shadow in the water. The forgotten grew stronger. New ones joined them, folks that stared too long into the swimming pools, who'd been pulled into the mirrored image, who'd been fed on by means of the hunger of those trapped among worlds. The barrier changed into weakening again, the old cycle repeating. One night, was it nighttime? Did night exist in reflection? Samantha saw a young girl putting in device by means of the pool. Cameras, meters, testing kits. A new researcher, continuing the work Samantha had started decades in the past. The lady regarded into the water, analyzing the reflection with extreme attention. And Samantha noticed the forgotten stirring, collecting, making ready to attain through when the barrier weakened enough. Samantha attempted to scream, to warn, but had no voice. She became a guardian, sure, however also a prisoner. Bound to observe, to witness, to preserve the barrier but not able to break it herself. The younger girl leaned in the direction of the water. The forgotten reached upward. And Samantha understood the terrible fact. The cycle could continue for all time. Guardians could be ate up, new ones would take their location, and the forgotten would continually hunger, constantly attain, usually check the bounds of their prison. She became a part of that cycle now. Part of the mirrored image that held returned the tide. A consciousness woven into water and moonlight and ancient magic, everlasting and empty. Within the world above, the researcher pulled back from the pool's facet, some intuition cautioned her away. She packed up her system and left quick, not looking back. The forgotten retreated, pissed off. Samantha felt them settling back into the depths of the pondered temple, waiting with the staying power of factors that exist outdoor time. And she or he waited with them, a dad or mum in a jail, looking through water as the arena moved on without her, as Angkor Wat stood eternal above its best mirrored image. The swimming pools had been designed to expose worlds, the mortal and the divine. But there was a third world too, the reflected international, the jail international, the gap among being and not being. And Samantha lived there now, would live there for all time, a awareness dissolved in water and light, keeping returned the hungry dark, preserving a seal that predated history. The mirrored image pool became ideal that morning, as it had been for hundreds of years. Vacationers took snapshots, marveling at how clearly the temple mirrored within the nonetheless water. They by no means saw the guardians looking from under, by no means knew about the forgotten prowling the meditated corridors. They noticed only splendor, best symmetry, only the suitable mirrored image of stone and sky. And that changed into how it ought to be. That became how it had to be. Because some reflections weren't just pictures. A few reflections have been prisons. And a few prisons required eternal guardians, looking forever from the incorrect facet of the replicate, preserving the sector secure from what lived within the space among fact and its echo. Samantha watches nonetheless. She'll watch for all time. That's what it weighs to appearance too deeply into water that become never intended to be disturbed. The faces within the stone. Thomas Chen had photographed abandoned buildings throughout 6 continents, but nothing prepared him for Angkor Wat at 3 a.m. His forte was urban exploration pictures, shooting forgotten locations of their raw, decaying splendor. While his editor cautioned a series on Angkor Wat's lesser-recognized temples, Thomas jumped on the possibility. Angkor Wat itself is just too touristy, his editor had stated. But there are hundreds of temples in the complex. Find the forgotten ones. Those tourists don't visit. It really is where the real tale is. Thomas employed a local manual named Dara, a quiet man in his 1930s who knew every temple within the full-size complicated. They had spent 3 days photographing minor ruins, Ta Prohm with its tree roots, Bayon with its enigmatic faces, dozens of smaller structures slowly being reclaimed by using jungle. On the 4th night time, Dara took him somewhere one of a kind. This temple has no authentic call, Dara explained as they drove down an increasing number of slim dust street. The locals call it Prasat Moha, the Temple of Faces. It is no longer on vacationer maps. Archaeologists cataloged it once within the 1960s, then abandoned their research. Why? Dara's expression became unreadable within the dashboard light. Human beings said it became cursed. 3 researchers disappeared. The Cambodian government quietly removed it from reputable statistics. Ideal, Thomas stated, checking his camera system. This became precisely the form of location his target market craved, true, mysterious, untouched by tourism. They reached the temple just after midnight. Thomas's first affect turned into that it changed into small, slightly larger than a house, just an unmarried structure surrounded through jungle. But as his flashlight played across the walls, he understood why it became referred to as the Temple of Faces. Each surface turned into protected in carved faces. No longer the serene, smiling faces of Bayon, these had been one of a kind, anguished, terrified, mouths frozen in silent screams. Masses of them, hundreds possibly, masking every stone like a pores and skin of struggling. Jesus, Thomas whispered, what is this vicinity? Nobody is aware of for certain. The fashion indicates past Du Khmer Empire, but the iconography is wrong. Those aren't gods or demons from any known mythology. Dara pointed his mild at a specifically demanding face, eyes too extensive, mouth stretched impossibly open. A few pupils concept it might be a memorial. Others believed it turned into a warning. A caution about what? Dara did not answer. He was already setting up perimeter lighting while Thomas started his photography routine. Long exposures, multiple angles, detailed shots of the carvings. The faces appeared to observe him work, their stone eyes following his actions. At 1 a.m., Thomas observed something unusual. In his pictures, some of the faces appeared one of a kind than they did in individual. A mouth that appeared closed to his naked eye becomes screaming in the photo. Eyes that regarded non-violent through his viewfinder confirmed natural terror on his digicam's display. Dara, have a look at this. Thomas confirmed him the pictures. The digital camera's picking up something I cannot see. Dara's face went light. We must leave. Are you kidding? That is wonderful. It might be a few form of optical impact, or perhaps the carvings alternate appearance below extraordinary light wavelengths. It's now not mild, Dara interrupted. The faces are displaying their proper nature. They simplest hide while you look immediately at them. This is impossible. Many not possible matters occurred all through the Khmer Empire. No longer they all are written within the reputable histories. Dara started out packing up the fringe lights. I have introduced you here in opposition to my higher judgment. I idea perhaps with current system with a skeptical thoughts, it'd be extraordinary. However the temple is reacting to you, we need to head. Thomas wasn't listening. He'd found something captivating, a sample within the faces. They were not randomly located. They formed a spiral, starting from the temple's entrance and shifting inward, every face extra distorted than the remaining, as though the carver have been descending into madness as he labored. He observed the spiral deeper into the temple, into chambers that became progressively smaller, greater claustrophobic. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. His flashlight beam appeared dimmer, struggling towards a darkness that felt nearly stable. The spiral ended in a small room at the temple's coronary heart, and there on the floor became a face not like the others. It wasn't carved into the wall. It turned into carved into the ground itself, a large face without difficulty 6FT throughout, its features greater practical than any of the others. The element became wonderful. Person hairs carved into the scalp, wrinkles across the eyes, even what seemed like pores in the stone pores and skin. Thomas knelt to picture it, and as he regarded via his viewfinder, the face's eyes opened. He jerked again, heart hammering. Via the viewfinder, simplest via the viewfinder, the stone eyes had moved, had looked immediately at him. He lowered the digicam. The eyes had been closed again, simply carved stone. He raised the digicam. The eyes opened, and this time the mouth moved too, lips pulling again from stone tooth. Thomas dropped the digital camera. It clattered on the stone ground, lens cracking. He scrambled backward, rational notion dissolving into primal fear. Dara regarded within the doorway. You checked out it without delay, failed to you, through the lens. The face, it moved. It's unsleeping now. Dara's voice turned into resigned. Come, quickly, earlier than it fully manifests. They ran via the temple, but the corridors had modified. The spiral of faces appeared to extend for all time now, twisting and delivering methods that rejected the temple's simple format. And the faces had been moving. Thomas saw it now even without the camera. Mouths commencing and final, eyes monitoring their flight, expressions moving from affliction to starvation. What is this place? Thomas gasped as they ran. A prison, Dara stated. At some point of the Empire's very last years, there has been a cult that worshipped something historical, something predating the Khmer gods. Whilst the king located them, he had them achieved, all of them, hundreds of cultists. However, their chief achieved a very last ritual. He sure the cult's awareness into stone, into this temple. Each face is a person, frozen forever of their moment of demise. They burst out of the temple into humid nighttime air. Thomas bent over, gasping. It truly is only a legend. It must be. Look, Dara pointed. The faces on the temples outside had been transferring too now. All of them turning to observe the two guys. Stone grinding in opposition to stone, the sound of centuries-old carvings coming to existence. The ritual wasn't just to preserve them, Dara persisted. It became to create a lure. The cult believed that if enough recognition turned into focused in a single vicinity, it could tear through the barrier among life and demise, could pull living minds into stone and unfasten the trapped ones. That's insane. Yes, however they had been insane, driven mad with the aid of anything entity they worshipped. Dara become already moving toward their vehicle. And now you have precipitated the entice. You appeared too deeply, photographed an excessive amount of. You've given them a connection. Thomas observed, but halfway to the car, he stopped. His shadow at the ground appeared wrong. It became shifting independently, gesturing, reaching in the direction of the temple. He watched in horror as his shadow's mouth opened, wider and wider, until it was screaming silently on the moonlit ground. It's beginning, Dara said. They may be attempting to pull your recognition out, to update it with one of their very own. We've perhaps an hour earlier than the switch completes. How will we prevent it? There is handiest one way. The ritual that trapped them can paintings in reverse. However it calls for, Dara hesitated. It requires someone to willingly take their region, to turn out to be the brand new father or mother, the new lock at the prison. Clearly no longer. Then you may become one among them. Your body will walk and talk, however it may not be you inner. It is going to be a centuries useless cultist, freed at ultimate, carrying your skin like a costume. Dara grabbed his shoulders. I have seen it appear before. The archaeologists who disappeared, they failed to vanish. They walked out of the jungle changed, and no one knew the difference. But I knew. I may want to see it of their eyes. Thomas checked out his shadow once more. It changed into mimicking him now, however behind schedule by means of several seconds, as though his movements were being transmitted to it from a distance. His connection to his very own body changed into weakening. There must be another way, he said desperately. There isn't always. I am sorry. I must in no way have introduced you here. Dara pulled out a smartphone, showing Thomas photos of the temple taken over decades. See, every 10 years, maybe 15, someone reveals this place. And on every occasion, the identical aspect takes place. They look too deeply, trigger the lure, and either they turn out to be a guardian or they are possessed. It really is how the temple has survived. Through compelled guardianship, everyone serving until the subsequent victim arrives. Who guards it now? Nobody. The closing mother or father's time period ended 3 years ago. The temple has been ready, hungry, geared up to trap a person new. Dara's voice broke. I used to be speculated to alert you, to ensure you didn't look without delay at the crucial face. However, I failed, and now you need to choose. Thomas felt his manipulate slipping. His arms moved without his command, achieving toward his digital camera bag. Something internal him, something that wasn't him, desired to move lower back, wanted to image greater faces, to look deeper into the stone. How long? He controlled to invite. If I become the guardian, how lengthy am I trapped? Until the subsequent character triggers the trap. Will be years, can be a long time. Thomas' idea of his life, his rental in Seattle, his career, his lady friend who didn't realize in which he simply changed into this night. He idea of that different focus trying to squeeze into his skull, pushing him out, taking over. He concept of the faces in the stone, trapped for hundreds of years, mad with isolation. Show me how, he stated. The ritual became easy and terrible. Thomas had to go back to the vital chamber, needed to lie down at the ground face, had to appearance directly into its eyes and receive the switch willingly. His focus could circulate the stone, turning into the father or mother, the lock that kept the others trapped. The cult leader's presence could retreat, dormant once more, waiting. Dara guided him lower back through the temple. The faces on the walls have been frantic now, sensing their opportunity slipping away. They screamed silently, stone mouths running, pleading, or threatening. Thomas could not inform which. Within the critical chamber, the floor face waited. Its eyes have been absolutely open now, boring into Thomas's soul. Lie down, Dara instructed. Investigate its eyes. Say the words I educate you. Your attention will switch into the stone, and you'll grow to be the temple's dad or mum. You'll be conscious but not able to move, not able to speak. You'll watch years skip like hours. However, you'll maintain them contained. And if I refuse? Then you lose yourself besides, but the cultist walks free for your frame, and the cycle continues. Thomas reduced himself onto the carved face. The stone changed into cold towards his lower back, and he could experience it, a presence inside the rock, ancient and patient, waiting to receive him. Dara started to chant in Khmer. Thomas repeated the words, no longer acknowledged them, however, feeling their electricity. The temple vibrated round them, the faces on the walls shrieking in fury or despair. Thomas regarded into the ground face's eyes and felt himself falling inward, his focus draining out of his frame like water through a crack. He tried to preserve on, however there was nothing to grip. He turned into flowing into stone, becoming part of the temple, his awareness spreading through the carved face like roots through soil. His final thought as an unfastened human become remorse. Remorse for his interest, for his vanity, for believing that a few things have been simply stone and shadow. Then he became the stone. Time exceeded in a different way in the temple. Thomas existed as a consciousness woven through rock, aware about everything but capable of nothing. He felt the solar rise and set, felt rain at the temple's roof, felt jungle flowers taking root in cracks. He felt the opposite faces, too, the trapped cultists, mad with centuries of imprisonment, constantly trying out the bonds that held them. And he understood. He turned into the lock. His recognition became the barrier that kept them contained. If he stopped willing their imprisonment, they would ruin free. So he held them, hour after hour, day after day, or after year. Dara got here occasionally, leaving services of incense and fruit. Thomas should feel his presence, however, could not communicate. He changed into a prisoner in stone, serving an eternal sentence for looking too deeply into matters first class left by myself. Sight visitors got here every so often, lost hikers, curious researchers. Thomas tried to warn them, attempted to make the faces at the partitions look bad sufficient to pressure them away. A few fled. Others have been stuck by means of the identical lure he'd fallen into. However, most significantly, no person looked at the valuable face. No one precipitated the entire transfer. Thomas's guardianship held. He misplaced music of time. Become it years, a long time. His experience of self commenced to erode, his reminiscences becoming indistinct and dreamlike. He remembered a person named Thomas Chen, remembered cameras and snapshots and an existence in a metropolis with rain, but all of it appeared remote, like a tale a person had instructed him once. He turned into becoming the temple, his consciousness dissolving into stone, spreading via every carved face, becoming much less human and more monument with each passing season. And still he held the jail. Nevertheless, he stored the cultists contained, because if he failed, they could escape, could locate newer bodies to inhabit, could spread their insanity across the world. At some point, or night time, he could not inform anymore. Someone entered the crucial chamber. Thomas felt the presence, felt a person looking at the floor face. Now not simply glancing, however searching deeply, photographing it, triggering the ancient entice. The switch commenced. Thomas felt his attention being drawn again, condensed, made human again. Someone new changed into taking his location, some other guardian for the eternal jail. Thomas's cognizance rushed again into his frame. Besides, it wasn't his body. A long time had handed. His authentic shape became long gone. This changed into a person else's body, a person who'd made the same mistake he had, regarded too deeply, fallen into the equal entice. He opened eyes that weren't his and saw Dara. Distinctly, impossibly, it turned into nevertheless Dara, even though he seemed older now, gray-haired and bent. "Welcome returned," Dara stated softly. "You served 43 years, one of the longer guardianships." Thomas, or whoever he changed into now, sat up in this borrowed frame. His thoughts felt scrambled, recollections overlapping. He remembered being Thomas Chen, remembered being the mum or dad, and now he had fragments of this new man or woman's existence. A researcher named Michelle, curious approximately forgotten temples, making the equal deadly errors. "What takes place to me now?" The voice that got here out wasn't Thomas's voice, wasn't Michelle's voice. It changed into something in between. "Now you go away," Dara stated. "You return to the sector, but you may not pretty in shape anymore. Part of you'll always be within the stone, and a part of the stone will always be in you. You'll recall each lives, neither absolutely. You may be." He searched for phrases. "Translated, changed, for all time caught between what you were and what you have become." Thomas/Michelle stood on shaking legs. Through the entrance, he should see the jungle, the actual global freedom. Behind him, he felt the new mother or father settling into place, taking on the vigil he'd maintained for 43 years. "Move," Dara entreated. "Earlier than you change your mind, before you recognize what you have lost." Thomas/Michelle walked out of the Temple of Faces on legs that slightly remembered how to walk. The night air felt extraordinary on borrowed skin. The arena had modified. He may want to see electric-powered lighting within the distance, hear the hum of automobiles on roads that hadn't existed while he'd entered the temple. 43 years. long past, spent as a focus in stone, protecting lower back insanity, serving as a lock on a jail that predated recorded records. He grew to become lower back once. The faces at the temple partitions watched him move, and he understood them now. They had been all like him, sufferers and guardians, prisoners and jailers, trapped in stone until a person else made the identical mistake. The cycle might maintain. It always did. Curiosity was humanity's defining trait, and some temples exploited that trait with deliberate cruelty. Thomas/Michelle walked into the jungle, closer to the remote lighting fixtures, carrying memories of 2 lives and the burden of 43 years spent as reciting stone. He would ought to construct a brand new lifestyles by some means, might have to provide an explanation for the misplaced decades, might should exist in a global that had moved on without him. But at least he become unfastened. At the least he changed into human once more or less. At the back of him, the Temple of Faces settled into watchful silence, its new father or mother in location, its prisoners held relaxed for some other generation. And inside the imperative chamber, carved into the floor, the first-rate face closed its eyes and waited. It might wait years, decades, centuries if important. The temple was affected person. It continually had been. And there might continually be a person new, someone curious, someone who seemed too deeply into faces that had been in no way intended to be seen. The trap remained. The prison held. And the cycle persisted, eternal as stone. The incomplete temple. Dr. Lisa Fontaine had studied Khmer structure for 12 years, but she'd by no means heard of Prasat Khmer till a water-broken manuscript arrived at her university from a Cambodian monastery. The text, written by a French colonial archaeologist in 1923, defined a temple that rejected each precept of Angkorian production. The temple is incomplete, the manuscript examined. Not deserted mid-production, but deliberately left unfinished. The builders carved doorways that lead nowhere, stairs that end at blank walls, corridors that circle back on themselves. It's far a temple designed to confuse, to entice, to save you something from finding its way out. The manuscript blanketed crude sketches and coordinates. Lisa spent 3 months securing investment and permissions earlier than eventually arriving in Cambodia with a small crew. Her graduate scholar Marco, a documentary filmmaker named Jennifer, and their Manuel Safik, who claimed his grandfather had worked at Angkor during the French colonial duration. Prasat Khmer means Black Temple, Safik explained as they hiked through dense jungle west of the primary Angkor complex. My grandfather noted it once. He said the French archaeologist who observed it went mad, stored drawing not possible maps, trying to chart a structure that made no geometric sense. Structure usually makes feel, Lisa stated hopefully. It's just a depend of understanding the developer's intentions. They reached the temple at midday. It emerged from the jungle like a fever dream rendered in stone, a structure that regarded to shift relying at the angle you considered it from. From one route, it regarded to be an easy 3-tail pyramid. From any other, it gave the impression of a sprawling complex of interconnected homes. The contradiction harmed Lisa's eyes. That's now not viable, Marco whispered, already pulling out his surveying system. Optical phantasm, Lisa stated, however her voice lacked fact. The jungle, the angles, the shadows, we will map it properly and the whole lot will make sense. They spent the afternoon taking measurements. The readings were nonsensical, distances that changed depending on which path you measured, walls that registered as both 5 ft thick and 15 toes thick concurrently, rooms that regarded larger on the inside than the out-of-doors need to permit. The gadget need to be malfunctioning, Jennifer stated, checking her cameras. My footage does not enshape what I'm seeing. In my viewfinder, the temple has 4 towers, but after I appearance up, I be counted 7. Safik stood other than the organization, refusing to method the temple front. We must leave earlier than darkish. This area was left unfinished for a reason. What purpose? Lisa requested. To preserve something internal. A temple finished is a pathway between earth and heaven, between mortal and divine. However, a temple unfinished is a maze, a jail without an exit. He gestured at the shape. Study it. Each door is incorrect. Each passage deceives. The developers were not growing sacred space. They have been developing to entice. For what? Safik's expression darkened. My grandfather stated that during the empire's decline, whilst the capital changed into moved from Angkor, the clergymen determined something inside the jungle. Something antique, predating the Khmer, predating even the Funan kingdom. They could not kill it, could not banish it. So they built round it, a temple intentionally designed to be not possible to navigate, to contain what couldn't be destroyed. Lisa desired to disregard it as folklore, but the temple's geometry gnawed at her rational mind. She'd studied thousands of systems, understood load distribution and sacred proportions, should read a constructing's motive in its layout. This temple study like chaos, like architectural nonsense, designed to be incomprehensible. Because the solar started out to set, casting lengthy shadows through the jungle, Lisa decided she would regret. We're going to live this night, report it properly. One nighttime of surveying will provide us information we can analyze returned at the university. Awful idea, Safik stated flatly. The manuscript you discovered, did it point out what passed off to the French archaeologist? It stated he deserted his studies, left Cambodia. It stated that because the monastery monks had been kind. The fact is darker. He entered this temple at night time, seeking to map it. His assistants observed him 3 days later, wandering the jungle, unable to speak. He'd misplaced something inside the temple, not his physical possessions, but something else. His feel, of course. His capacity to discover his way everywhere. He spent the relaxation of his existence lost, even in familiar places, even in his own home. He may want to by no means discover his manner lower back to something. Marco laughed nervously. This is not possible. Spatial orientation is neurological, now not. No longer what? Safik interrupted. Not mystical, now not non-secular. You stand before a temple that breaks the laws of geometry and you continue to grasp to what's not possible. Lisa silenced the argument. We have GPS, radios, lights. We will be great. Safik, you could wait at base camp if you're uncomfortable. Safik shook his head. If you're getting into, I am going with you. Someone has to manual you out. They entered the temple as darkness fell. The interior turned into worse than the outdoors. Corridors branched at not possible angles. Stairs ascended, then descended, then ascended again without ever gaining elevation. Doorways opened onto rooms that they had already passed, but from exceptional instructions. Lisa attempted to maintain scientific detachment, mapping their course, marking walls with chalk. But the marks disappeared, or appeared in locations they hadn't been, or improved into dozens of marks on walls that they had marked as soon as. We're moving into circles, Jennifer said, checking her photos. However, we are no longer. In line with my timestamps, we've been shifting continuously forward, however we preserve passing the equal chamber. It's no longer the same chamber, Marco countered. The carvings are different, see? This one has Apsara dancers, the one earlier than had warfare scenes. They're the equal, Jennifer insisted. I filmed each, they're equal. They were not same. Lisa should see that. However, they were similar, too comparable, as if the temple turned into repeating variations on a subject, creating limitless permutations of the equal basic area. We should head back, she decided. That is too disorienting. We'll return in sunlight hours with better equipment. They tried to retrace their steps. The chalk marks were gone. Lisa's carefully drawn map no longer matched the corridors they walked through. Her compass spun uselessly, not able to discover north. The GPS showed their vicinity as a scattered cloud of points, as though they existed in more than one places concurrently. Safik, you understand the manner out. Marco's voice turned into tight with growing panic. Safik stood immobile, his face pale within the flashlight beam. I've misplaced it. The direction. I can sense it, it's gone. The temple has taken my feel of route. It really is absurd, Lisa said, but while she spoke, she felt it too. A few essential feel of orientation, of understanding which way become which, had vanished. She ought to see the corridors in advance, should stroll ahead, however had no idea if she became shifting closer to the exit or deeper into the temple. They were lost, no longer misplaced inside the conventional sense. They could pass, ought to make selections. However, every direction was similarly meaningless. The temple had stripped away their capacity to navigate, had taken the intuitive feel that allowed humans to find their way through space. The French archaeologist, Lisa breathed, that is what took place to him. We need to mark a path, Jennifer said, something everlasting. They tried. They carved arrows into the stone with Marco's knife. However, the arrows pointed in contradictory instructions, or disappeared, or increased into conflicting signs and symptoms. They laid out a trail of gadget, camera batteries, notebooks, pieces of clothing. However, after they tried to follow it again, the objects led them in circles. Hours passed, or days. Time felt as unreliable as area within the temple's indoors. Lisa's watch confirmed 9:47 p.m., but it had proven 9:47 p.m. for what felt like hours. Her cell phone changed into no assist, the battery become complete, but the clock had frozen in the meanwhile that they had entered the temple. They wandered through endless versions of the equal chambers. Now and again they climbed stairs, on occasion descended. They exceeded through galleries carved with scenes of misunderstanding and loss, people wandering mazes, souls searching for paths through underworlds, gods misplaced in their personal creation. It is feeding on us, Safik said. His voice turned into whole, defeated. The element the temple become built to incorporate. It does not need to escape. It feeds on folks that input, ingesting their experience of direction, their capacity to discover their way. We are giving it what it desires simply through being right here. There must be a pattern, Lisa insisted. She was an archaeologist, a scientist. Buildings had common sense, even this one. She simply had to locate it. She studied the carvings greater carefully, seeking out clues. The scenes of wandering were not random. They informed a story. Human beings getting into a labyrinth, people seeking to get away. And within the final panel, slightly visible inside the darkness, people sitting down, giving up, accepting that they would wander all the time. It is the answer, Lisa realized with horror. The way out is not via navigation, it's through give up. What? Marco grabbed her arm. That makes no experience. None of this makes sense. It really is the factor. The temple turned into constructed to defy common sense, to trap things that navigate via conventional area. However, if you forestall attempting to find your way, if you take delivery of being lost, you are no longer a part of the maze. This is insane, Jennifer stated. Maybe, however, we have been walking for hours and we're nowhere. We're feeding the component trapped here, feeding it our desperation, our want to get away. What if we forestall? What if we simply sit down and wait? They argued, but exhaustion and fear eventually won. They determined a chamber, or it had been the equal chamber that they had been passing repeatedly, and sat down. Lisa closed her eyes, actively trying to forget which way they had come from, which way they have to pass. It became more difficult than it must were. Every instinct screamed to maintain shifting, to locate an exit, to orient herself. However, she pressured the one's instincts quiet, forced herself to just accept that she turned into lost, that she could constantly be lost, that there was no way out. And something modified. While Lisa opened her eyes, the chamber became special. Now not glaringly so, the same carvings, the identical partitions, however one of a kind in a few fundamental way. The air felt lighter. The darkness appeared less oppressive. She stood and walked forward without considering path, without looking for an exit. She simply walked, letting her feet deliver her randomly via corridors. The others observed, too exhausted to argue. They walked for what could have been minutes or hours, after which, impossibly, they have been outdoor. The jungle surrounded them, dawn light filtering through the cover. The temple stood behind them, its impossible geometry still hurting to examine. How? Marco whispered. We stopped trying to get away, Lisa stated. We accepted being lost, and the temple, Allow us to pass." Safik became already walking away, moving via the jungle with reality. "We want to leave, now, earlier than it changes its thoughts." They accompanied him, not looking returned, but Lisa could sense it. Something had changed internal her. As they hiked lower back closer to their base camp, she found out she'd become guessing at directions, no longer sure which way changed into which. Her feel of orientation was broken, weakened. They reached camp, however it took 2 times as long as it had to have. Lisa stored them in wrong instructions, her inner compass permanently skewed. Over the subsequent days, it got worse. She got misplaced in her resort, got misplaced on foot to restaurants she'd visited a dozen instances. Her GPS helped, but without it, she was helpless, not able to hold even primary spatial awareness. Marco and Jennifer have been the equal. They moved through the world like people convalescing from vertigo, continuously checking landmarks, unable to accept as true with their experience, of course. Simplest Safik changed into unaffected. He'd in no way misplaced his sense of route due to the fact he'd by no means attempted to navigate the temple. He'd normal from the start that it changed into impossible. Lisa lower back to the us, but her career turned into effectively over. She could not work in area archaeology. Getting misplaced in a dig website online turned into dangerous. She couldn't even navigate her own campus without smartphone steering. The college quietly cautioned she take a depart of absence. She spent her time studying the temple, seeking to recognize what it turned into, what it contained. She determined references to similar systems throughout Southeast Asia, mazes constructed to trap demons, labyrinths designed to incorporate spirits, architectural prisons for matters that existed in space, but no longer in any manner human beings could realize. The issue in Prasat Khmao wasn't evil, she determined. It became simply alien, something that skilled area in a different way, that would flow through dimensions humans could not understand. The Khmer builders had created a structure that becomes similarly incomprehensible, a maze in 4 dimensions or 5 or 6, so complex that even this dimensional wanderer could not find its way out. And everyone who entered fed it, gave it a flavor of human spatial focus, made it barely stronger, barely more capable of understand how people navigated their international. Sooner or later, Lisa idea, it'd recognize sufficient. It'd learn from all of the lost wanderers, all of the careworn explorers. It would recognize human area nicely enough to navigate it. And then the temple would not maintain it anymore. She attempted to warn humans. She posted papers that had been politely overlooked. She contacted UNESCO, the Cambodian authorities, instructional institutions. No person listened. The temple wasn't on professional maps, wasn't part of the traveler infrastructure. It became forgotten, unnoticed, dismissed. Besides, through people like her, curious researchers who determined old manuscripts, who went searching out forgotten temples, who thought they may understand the not possible. Lisa tracked reports. Each few years, someone found Prasat Khmao. A few came returned disoriented, however alive, like she had. Others vanished completely, lost so absolutely they in no way determined their way back to the world. And with each traveler, the factor within the temple learned a bit greater. Lisa stored a map on her wall, marked with each mentioned sighting, each disappearance. The sample changed into clear. The incidents have been increasing. Extra human beings finding the temple. Greater spatial anomalies suggested inside the surrounding jungle. The containment turned into failing. She calculated that within a decade, maybe, the aspect inside the temple would apprehend human area well enough to escape. After which what? A being that existed in dimensions humans couldn't perceive, that moved via space in methods that confounded geometry, unfastened in an international of cities and roads and limitations. Lisa could not imagine what could happen, but she knew it would be catastrophic. She spent her days misplaced in her very own condo, unable to locate the restroom without her cell phone's steerage, not able to walk to the Nook store without GPS. The temple had taken something from her that could in no way be restored. had damaged some fundamental part of her mind that understood spatial relationships. And now and again, past due at night, she felt the temple calling. No longer in words or sounds, but within the pull of confused directions, in the sensation of all paths being equally misplaced. The factor within the temple remembered her. It had tasted her sense of path, fed on a part of her potential to navigate. She turned into link to it now. And because it grew more potent, because it found out more from each new victim, she felt that connection deepening. One night, Lisa woke to locate herself standing in her living room, going through the wall, shifting her fingers as if beginning a door. There has been no door. However she may want to feel it, a passage beginning, a direction performing, a way via area that shouldn't exist. The temple changed into attaining out. The issue inner become getting to know to create its own unfinished areas, its own impossible architectures, extending its jail outward into the sector. Lisa forced herself to step again, to break the connection. However, it changed into getting tougher. The pull turned into getting more potent. She knew what she needed to do. She had to pass lower back. Had to return to Prasat Khmau before the entity discovered sufficient to get away completely. Someone needed to enter the temple and stay there, permanently lost, to maintain feeding it, to hold it glad with human spatial feel so it would not want to escape. Someone had to come to be a part of the prison. Lisa booked a flight to Cambodia. She did not inform all and sundry where she became going. She left notes, motives, warnings that possibly wouldn't be studied or believed. She again to the jungle, to the temple that rejected geometry, to the maze built to keep something incomprehensible. Safik turned into ready. He'd recognized she might come again. "You understand now," he stated. It wasn't a query. A person has to stay. Someone has to maintain it fed, hold it contained. "My grandfather stayed," Safik stated quietly. "That is what genuinely passed off. He entered the temple and in no way got here out. He's still there, wandering, forever misplaced, giving the aspect inner a taste of human cognizance so it doesn't want to seek for greater." How long did he closing? 70 years. The temple launched his body last month. That is when I knew it'd begin calling once more, searching out a brand new wanderer. Lisa checked out the impossible structure. At the temple that changed into entire and incomplete concurrently, finished and unfinished, a prison that was additionally a feeding floor. "How long will I ultimate?" she asked. "So long as you may preserve onto yourself, so long as you can stay lost without forgetting who you're." Safik placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whilst you forget about, when you become just any other part of the maze, the temple will release you, and it'll call for someone new." Lisa entered the temple. The corridors stretched earlier than her, may nowhere and anywhere, paths that confounded area and logic and sanity. She walked ahead without looking for an exit, without trying to orient herself. She simply walked, accepting the infinite confusion, feeding the factor that lurked in dimensional spaces people couldn't perceive. Behind her, the doorway sealed, or perhaps it did not. Perhaps it stayed open. Within the unfinished temple, where nothing changed into ever entire, even exits and entrances were uncertain. Lisa wandered. She wanders nonetheless. Part of the jail, part of the maze, forever lost in corridors that loop and twist through not possible geometries. And the element in the temple feeds on her confusion, satisfied for now, contained for a while longer. However, sooner or later, someone will input who can't accept being lost. Someone whose want to get away is more potent than their endurance. A person who will spoil in preference to bend. And on that day, the incomplete temple will finally launch what it turned into constructed to include. The entity will apprehend human space at closing. And the world will research what it means to be virtually, completely, irreversibly lost.